command of the assault belongs to an epistolary of the Librarian, a deadly battle psyker of the chapter. Leading a specially assembled squad, the Librarian will...
Space Hulk Deathwing is a first-person shooter set in the Warhammer 40k universe where you take on the role of a Librarian of the Dark Angels, heading into a Gene Stealer-infested Space Hulk, using a variety of weapons and psi powers with an original storyline as a backdrop. It's just been released for Microsoft Windows with a release slated for the console sometime in 2017. Now at first glance it appears to be a somewhat Left 4 Dead clone set in the Warhammer 40k universe, which it kind of is, but you're probably wondering, does it have enough uniqueness and character to separate it and make it stand alone as its own game? Well, let's find out. So the story here is pretty simple. After receiving an order from the Grand Master, your character, a Librarian, has been sent into a ship graveyard of sorts to investigate a particular Space Hulk. The entire Space Hulk has been overrun with Gene Stealers, and not long after arriving on the ship you're attacked by droves of them, and from here on in there's usually a constant stream of them just spawning out of every possible nook and cranny. Playing as a Librarian gives you access to powerful psychic powers like firing out lightning bolts or knocking enemies back with a concussive blast by default. When upgraded you can fire out powerful blasts of fire, you can cause enemies to detonate or teleport inside an enemy and rip them to pieces from the inside out, which is pretty badass. You're also aided by two other Terminators. You've got a sort of heavy weapons guy that can use all the big guns, and you've got a medic of sorts that can heal himself and the others if your armor gets too low. You can also give these guys basic orders and choose what weapons they use for each chapter as well. Now when you're online playing the whole thing in co-op, it's literally the exact same storyline, just played with other people instead of AI teammates. You can choose between two modes and a few different classes, which are loosely based off the Terminators from the single player, and as you make kills you level up, giving you access to more powers depending on the class you're playing as. Now like a lot of Warhammer games, Space Hulk is just chock full of 40k lore, from the Gene Stealers through to the backstory of the Dark Angels, down to the various relics you can recover in each chapter of the game. Even the usage of the iconic bolter gun used by the Space Marines and other weapons you get to play around with, it's full of the kind of stuff that 40k fans just love to see. But if you're not a huge fan of the series, like myself, then it may kind of go over your head a little bit, but you can't deny the amount of detail and the dedication the developers have really made here to the source material. The world itself is rich in detail as well. Visually, the game runs on the Unreal 4 engine, which looks pretty good most of the time. The modelling for the Librarian and the Terminators is really well done, and the weapons look great as well. During heavy combat, it's common to see body parts flying all over the place, and there's a lot of blood and gore, which makes the fighting seem a lot more intense. Sadly though, it doesn't run very well. I mean, on my GTX 1080 I was getting the game dipping into 20 frames a second during heavy combat areas, which can kind of unfairly handicap you if you're getting smashed from all sides, whilst also contending with a chugging frame rate. Here's hoping they patch this kind of thing out, but at the moment it's a real detriment to what is otherwise a pretty decent looking game. But I guess all that people really want to know about is the gameplay. Well, there's really not all that much to say. Each chapter of the game drops you into a large complex environment where you're often given maybe 3 or 4 different objectives to complete, most of which just require going to a certain area and pressing a button or killing something. All of which are usually on opposite sides of the map, forcing you to traverse back and forth. Now I don't know if this was the best idea, considering your movement speed is kinda gimped being in power armor and all, but it does make you feel like you're lumbering around in this huge walking suit of death. Along the way you're frequently attacked by the Gene Stealers, in fact almost the entire time, and it often just becomes something of a race against the clock as you can't really avoid taking damage, so you just kinda have to finish the level as fast as possible before you run out of healing items. Most chapters often end with you standing your ground in a fixed position as you're attacked from every single angle. It gets a bit repetitive. At any time though, you can use a psi gate and teleport your whole squad to a safe space where they're instantly healed and your healing items are all topped up, but these are limited in usage, so once they're gone for the rest of the chapter. This safe space is also where you're able to change your own loadout as well as the loadout for your Terminators. At the end of each chapter you get a rating which then gives you a bunch of skill points to spend on upgrading one of 3 skill trees. You've got Command, Devotion and Psychic. Now let me just interject here and say that if you don't spend some points into Psychic, you're gonna have a bad time. Along the way you'll also unlock bigger and better guns and be able to equip them on your Terminators if they're able to wield them. And equipping either of these guys with melee weapons makes them near unstoppable. And it is fun, initially, you know, just mowing down waves and waves of brain-dead Gene Stealers who will do little more than just run right up to you and take a chunk out of you with their massive claws. To mix this up, you'll contend with Gene Stealer hybrids armed with machine guns and rocket launchers, and tougher Gene Stealers that just have a crap load more health points and can hit a lot harder. Just think the tanks from Left 4 Dead and you get the idea. Powers are also destructive and really fun to use, and I like the various little bits of dialogue the characters shout out during combat. It's got this very dark and cool atmosphere, and you kind of forget that you're basically playing as some kind of futuristic fundamentalist that really hates anything that doesn't share his ideology. Now, I guess the biggest comparison to be made here is the gameplay in the Left 4 Dead games and more recently Warhammer Vermintide. I mean, these were games that also featured co-op play where you were taken on this never-ending barrage of enemies, and they did that style of gameplay quite well. However, I think the problem with Space Hulk is that there's not really any kind of surge to it. You're always just getting this constant trickling of enemies coming in. That sudden rush of adrenaline in Left 4 Dead and even Vermintide, when you just got this sudden bombardment of enemies, is really missing here, or at least it's a lot more downplayed. Later levels just throw quite literally dozens of enemies at you at once, including 2 or 3 of the toughest enemy types in the game as an artificial way to make the later chapters more challenging, which can feel really cheap. Your teammate AI is usually pretty smart and they can take most enemies out quite easily, but sometimes they'll just stand in one position getting pummeled by half a dozen enemies, at which point they'll just get killed in seconds. Gotta say, I'm not the biggest fan of the saving and loading system. It just seems really weird. It seems to autosave at certain points, which is fine, but it doesn't revert back to the last save file when you're killed. And you have to go through this really crappy looking screen and look for the most recent save file because for some reason they're not put in order. Kinda sucks too how the campaign is so short. It took me around 5 hours to finish the whole thing on the normal difficulty. Now I'm told I finish games very quickly, but even still I couldn't see this thing taking people longer than 7 or 8 hours tops. Multiplayer on the other hand is a whole different kettle of fish, and it has bugs coming out the wazoo, and like a lot of online modes, it's really going to make or break the experience depending on what kind of people you're playing with. According to some people, this is as bad if not worse as it was in the beta, and nothing's really been fixed, which is a real letdown. I mean, look, these aren't really game-breaking problems or anything, it's just they keep the game from truly being amazing or outstanding, especially these issues with the multiplayer. As it stands, it's enjoyable for what it is, but I think people expecting more out of the whole thing might leave feeling a little bit disappointed. I think the main reason the game has such a low rating on Steam is solely because of the performance problems, and as a result, another perfectly decent enough game is going to be overlooked thanks to people who give a game a negative rating because they can't be bothered waiting a week or so to see if the damn thing gets fixed. There's been worse launches for sure, especially in 2016. So look, Space Hulk may be far from perfect, but it's worth checking out maybe a month or so down the track when they've ironed out all the bugs, because there is a fun game here, it just needs a bit more work.